All right. I know that for some of you, that was the most intimidating moment of this whole morning. Yes, I see you. But it's over. Don't worry. It's all done. You don't have to talk to anybody anymore if you don't want to. It's okay. So I'll talk for a little bit, give you a little respite, and then if you feel like talking again at the end, you can. But guys, I'm so excited that you have joined us here for Easter morning. All week I have just been in prayer and praying about this service, and it's so hard because I feel like I do not have the words to express the amazingmentness, how amazing the Easter resurrection is, how incredible this is, what it means for you and for me. And so I've been like fumbling over my words all week. And so I'm just praying that like something will come out that makes sense so that you too can understand the great power of the resurrection, what it means for you and for me right here in this moment, not just in the future. So I had you share your favorite Easter tradition. I wanted to share mine. With my kids, I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. And when, I think when our 8-year-old was about 4 and our 5-year-old was like 1, so maybe 4 years ago or so, we started this Easter tradition we call it Stinky Feet. And what we do for Stinky Feet is we pick just one night on Holy Week. It doesn't matter when it is. It's just leading up to Easter. We do Stinky Feet, and what it means is we go for a walk barefoot. And the challenge of this walk is not just like take a walk. It's like get your feet as dirty as possible. Like find some mud and jump in it. If you can find dog poop, like bonus points. When there's not dog poop available, if you can just kind of rough up some bird poop, like that's good too. Get your feet as absolutely stinky and messy and gross as possible. And then we walk around the block and we get back to the house, and when we get there, we've already set up sort of this basin of water outside along with my kid's favorite Bible book, which is the Jesus Storybook Bible, which if you're a parent of young kids, that is the Bible to get, the Jesus Storybook Bible. Don't buy any other one, that one, that's the one. And so in the Jesus Storybook Bible, it tells the story of the stinky feet. It's actually called Stinky Feet, and it's the story of when Jesus washes his disciples' feet. So it starts out telling the story about how in those days people either were barefoot or they wore sandals. And so as they went along the road, they didn't have covering on their feet. And so all of the grime of the road would just get on their feet. And it wasn't normal grime like me and you experience in these days. It was lots more grime because back then there were no cars. Instead they had animals that pulled the carts, and the animals left behind, stuff. And as it left behind the stuff, the people would walk through the stuff, and their feet would get filthy, stinky, dirty. So when they finally would get to a house, they would come in, and the lowliest servant would come and would wash the grimy, dirty, stinky stuff off the people's feet. And it was a lowly, lowly, lowly job. And so we tell the story of this whole thing, and we make this context, and here our feet are, and they're gross, and they're stinky, and we got dog poop on them. And then there was an argument. While they were waiting for dinner, the disciples, the followers of Jesus, started arguing, and they started arguing about who was the greatest, who was the most important. They had heard that Jesus was going to be establishing a kingdom, and they believed that. And so they started asking themselves, well, when is the most important? Who is going to be the most important person in this kingdom? Who is going to be like the Secretary of State in Jesus' new kingdom? Who is going to be the Attorney General in Jesus' new kingdom? And so they were arguing about who was the most important, who was the most valuable, who was the most loved. And so Jesus comes in. And for whatever reason, there was no lowly servant to wash their feet. And so Jesus gets down on his knees in the midst of them arguing about who was the most important. He gets down on his knees and he pulls up a basin of water and he washes his disciples' feet. He sticks his hands in the poopy, yucky grossness of their feet and washes their feet. And as he does it, he teaches his disciples. He says, this is an act of love. You see, in my kingdom, it's not who is the greatest, who is the most powerful that is truly the greatest. It's who loves the most, who serves the most. If you want to be great in Jesus' kingdom, you better get down on your hands and knees and serve the other people, love them. So we tell this whole story with my girls, and the whole time they're like flinging their feet around, and we're like, don't fling your feet, right? And we're telling the story of how the disciples were arguing, and Jesus says, no, the greatest in my kingdom is the one who would lay down his life for his friends. The greatest in my kingdom is the one who would go last. So I kid you not, I say, okay, so now we're going to wash each other's feet. And my girls immediately go, I'm going first because I'm the biggest. I'm going first because I'm the oldest. I'm going first because I'm the fastest. I'm going first because I'm the smartest. One of them even said, I'm going first because I fart the loudest. And I was like, really, girl? Like, this is the thing that we should be arguing about, like competing over? And so, but in that moment, they're arguing, just like the disciples had argued, of who was the most important and who should get their feet washed first. And so in that moment, I'm like, are you serious? We just had this story. We just had this whole lesson. I did a really good job of teaching this. And you missed the whole point. You in this moment should be like, no, you first, sister. No, you first, sister. No, you go first. I'll wash your feet, sister. No. None of that happened. See, they had heard the details of the story, but they had totally missed the point. They had no understanding of how it actually applied to them and their lives. They missed that completely. And we all have this propensity to do that exact thing. We all have this way in which, like, we hear the story, the life of Jesus, and then we're like, yeah, that's good. Okay, moving on. We hear the power and the story of the resurrection, how this guy was dead and then came back to life, but we miss the point. We don't get it. It doesn't really sink in. We just kind of keep going. We say, yeah, that's great that Jesus has this resurrected life. That's fantastic. But we continue to live in our world viewing it as something that is marked by death and despair and darkness. And it's really, really easy to think that that is the reality of the world that we live in, that is really all that we could know or all that we could see is death and darkness and despair. Because when you watch the news, like that really is the thing that is highlighted. I mean, if you've been watching even since the beginning of the year, I mean, even before then, but really, really, really since the beginning of the year, the number of school shootings that have been blaring across the media has been staggering. These students who are so angry and so full of rage and darkness and depression, and they don't know where to turn, choose actions that take another's lives, choose actions that are violent. And so we look at that and we say, yeah, the world is full of darkness. The world is full of death. We hear stories of women coming forward with testimonies of being either verbally or physically assaulted in workplace positions. And we say, yeah, that's how the world is. That's what it is. Or we hear stories of public officials who have betrayed somebody else, who have misplaced trust. We, as people, as fellow citizens of this country or immigrants of this country, we look at the world and we distrust each other. And we say, yeah, that's what this world is. It's a dark place. It's a place of destruction. That's just the reality of what it is. And we look at that darkness and we look at that death and we look at that destruction. And we say, yeah, you're just going to have to figure it out and accept it. Like, this is just what it is. Now, sitting here in this room, I'm certain that there are people that the idea of death and darkness isn't a faraway concept. It's a right here concept. It's a here and now concept. I know that there are people in this room who have experienced the death of a loved one recently or are walking through an illness right now that are just like, yeah, this sucks. This is terrible. This is disheartening. This is hopeless. And maybe it's not physical for some of you. Maybe for some of you, it's a spiritual death that you are struggling through. It's a mental death that you are wrestling with. It is an emotional death or a social death that you just can't rectify. And there's a power that speaks to you that says, yep, this is just all there is. This death, this darkness, this despair, this is just the reality that we live in. This is just the world that we live in. This is just how it is, and you're just going to have to accept it. You see, 2,000 years ago, there was a group of people who had the same experience. They were standing at the foot of a cross where a man had been crucified, and in that moment, there were no believers, and there were no disciples, and there were no followers, not anymore. Because you see, those people standing at that foot of the cross, they had heard the man that was now crucified and dying speak of a new kingdom that was going to come. And they had believed in this kingdom, and they had given their life for this kingdom, and they said, yes, he's going to be the king, and I'm following him, and I want this kingdom. You see, Jesus had proclaimed that a new kingdom was coming. A new kingdom was here, now. It was a kingdom of hope. It was a kingdom of joy. It was a kingdom where there would be no more pain, where there would be no more death, where it would be covered in grace and love and forgiveness, that there would be no more injustice, but instead there would only be justice. It was a place where people would be cared for and comforted. And all of these followers said, yes, I want that kingdom. And as Jesus preached about this kingdom, he said some really specific things. He said, hey, this isn't a kingdom far out there. It's not far out in the future. It is right here, and it is right now. It is close at hand. And the people said, yes, we believe it. And then Jesus said, and it's not just for the people who are morally upright. It's not the people who can get their kids in the Easter dress with the perfect hair and the bow and actually clean. It's not for those people. It's for the people who come a mess. It's for the people who can't get it together. It's for the people who have made mistakes. It's for the people who have said things they shouldn't have, or done things they shouldn't have, or been places they shouldn't. It's for all of those people if they would just trust in the king. And Jesus said, and you know what? I'm the king. Jesus said, I'm the one who will inaugurate the kingdom. I'm the one who will bring about this kingdom to place. And anyone who trusts in me as the king, they will be accepted into this new kingdom. And so the disciples, I'm sure at first, the followers, the people at first were like, yeah, that kingdom, that sounds far-fetched. I mean, we've tried to do utopian societies before, and they have all failed. How could there be a kingdom without pain, without suffering, without sickness, without death? How is that possible? And yet Jesus walked from town to town. He went to village, and he started to give the people these glimpses of what this actually looked like, these glimpses of what this new kingdom was going to be like. And he would go and he would find the sick and he would heal them. He would go and he'd find those who mourned and he would give them joy. He would go and he would find the mentally disturbed and he would comfort them. He brought hope where there was none. He would go and he would find the places where there was death and he would bring life. And so the disciples and the followers like, oh my gosh, if he has the power to do this, maybe he actually has the power to bring this kingdom. Maybe this is really true. Maybe it's not just talk. Maybe he could really make this. And the disciples began to dream of a new kingdom that would fill the whole earth, that wouldn't just be in this one place wherever Jesus existed, but that the kingdom really would happen, that the kingdom would be established here on earth. And it would be everywhere, and it would be here, and it would be now. And they had all sorts of ideas of how that would happen and what it would look like. But then, standing at the foot of the cross, shrouded in death and despair, all that they had once hoped for was in that moment dead. It had gone. It no longer existed, because the hope of that coming kingdom died with the king that was hanging on the cross. He had been arrested, he had been falsely accused, he had been beaten, he had been crucified, and he died. All that was left was sort of this sad memory of a really good teacher, but a failed Messiah. And so there was this voice in the back of their head that said, yeah, you just gotta accept this as reality. This is the new world. This is the reality that we live in. You just kind of accept this and move on. And perhaps they did for a couple days. They tried to grieve and mourn and accept that this darkness was all that there was. But then, and aren't you so glad that there is a but then? But then, Luke tells us in chapter 24 that on the third day there were a group of women who had gone to the tomb. And the body had already been embalmed. It was 75 pounds of like myrrh that had been wrapped around this body, which like I'm thinking like 160, 180, maybe 230. I don't know how much he like worked out, but if you add 75 pounds, it's a lot and more than I can lift. And here is Jesus' corpse lying in a tomb, wrapped in this myrrh, wrapped in linen. And the women were going to bring more spices for the body. And as they walk there early in the morning, you can imagine that walk, because maybe you've walked it. Where on your way, you rethink every conversation. You rethink every interaction. You think, well, what could I have done differently? What could have been different? What could I have said? What could I have done to have prevented this death? And you relive that over and over again. And I imagine that for them on that walk to the tomb, that is exactly what they were doing. So with each step, it was another wave of emotion that swarmed over them. But on the horizon, they saw the tomb, and it was different than they had left it. This time, the large stone that was placed at the entryway to make sure nobody could enter had been rolled away. It was pushed off to the side. And so as they saw this wasn't a moment of hope for them. Don't be confused. It was a moment of terror that their worst nightmares had actually happened. And so they ran to the tomb and they looked inside, and yes, the body was gone. But the strangest thing was that the linens that Jesus' corpse had been wrapped in were lying there at the base of the tomb. And they kept thinking to themselves, why, if somebody was going to steal the body, would they unwrap the body first? Why wouldn't they keep it all nicely packaged as they carried it off? Why are the linens on the floor? And so puzzled and bewildered, they fell to the floor and wept and mourned and cried out. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to say, and the grief washed over them again. But then in the corner of their eye, they see this glimmer of light. And they're disturbed by it, and they look up expecting it maybe to be the sun peeking over the horizon, maybe to be cutting through some tree branches, but no, the glimmer of light is two men. Men don't shine. But it says that they are shining men. And so they are terrified, and they hit the deck again, and they cower in fear, and then these men speak to them, and they say this thing. They say, why do you look for the living? Why do you look for the living one among the dead? Now, I imagine that the women were terrified. I mean, if it had been me, I'd have been like, I can't speak. I can't even answer this question. I don't even know, right? Like, I wouldn't have been able to say anything because it wouldn't have been good. I'd just be on the floor, terrified. But I imagine if they had been able to say something, they would have said something like this: because Jesus died, and where we live in this world, dead things stay dead. Lifeless things stay lifeless, and hopeless things remain just that, hopeless. That's how it is in this world. What they didn't understand, what they didn't get, was that the kingdom that Jesus had talked about was not dead with the king who was crucified. The kingdom that Jesus had talked about had just come in even greater fullness. The kingdom that Jesus had talked about was here, and it was now, and it was creeping in. See, Jesus had shown these glimpses, but now a window had been opened to this is what the kingdom is. Dead things don't stay dead. Lifeless things don't stay lifeless, and hopeless things do not stay hopeless. This darkness, this death, this hopelessness is not all there is. This is not the reality. This is not the world. There is a new kingdom that has come, and Christ is alive, and he is the king. And so the men say to the women who are still cowering in fear, unable to understand what is going on. And the men say to them, he says, he is not here. He has risen. Remember how he told you that while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners? He must be crucified and on the third day be raised again. Now, the women in this moment all of a sudden realize, they have heard this before. In fact, this is exactly, almost verbatim, what Jesus had told them. Luke tells us this in chapter 9, that Jesus had told all of his followers, all of the disciples, he said, listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. He had told them this was going to happen. There was no fear, there was no reason to fret. He told them this, but Luke tells us that they didn't understand what this meant, for it was hidden from them, so that they didn't grasp it, and they were afraid to ask him about it. So often when we go through these things, the reason behind it is hidden from us. We don't get to see it, we don't get to know it, but in this instance, the women, when they hear the men say this, Luke tells us, he says that they remembered Jesus' words. That in that moment, it clicks for them. It's not just a story that has no connection to them. It's a story, a truth, a reality, a happening that has everything to do with them and who they are. They remembered Jesus' words. They got it. They understood it. They got that Jesus had to suffer. And his suffering wasn't meaningless. His suffering wasn't the end of a kingdom. The suffering was the beginning of the kingdom, because with that, he brought life. There's this church father who, long time ago, but his name was Gregory of Nyssa. And he said this. He said, for that which Jesus has not assumed, he has not healed. But that which he is united to himself is also saved. Now, I know that that's super confusing. What the heck does that mean? But what Gregory is trying to get after is he's saying, if Jesus doesn't take something on, like if there's some part of humanity that Jesus says, I don't really want to have to do with that. I don't really want to have to go through death. I don't really have to go through suffering. Then Jesus could not heal death or heal suffering. But because he experienced humanity in its total fullness, he is able to heal it. He united himself to all of humanity so that he could save it. A lot of times we talk about how Jesus took on our death, but what we miss is that when Jesus took on our death, he gave us his life. He said, now you get this. Now you go from being mortal to immortality. Now you go from your darkness, your despair, your death to my righteousness, my life, my resurrection. It's yours. You have access to it. He offers a way when there was no way. And so these women, after Christ died, go through these 3 days of terrible grief. They're falling apart in hopelessness. They go through 3 days of a voice inside of their head saying, this hell that you're experiencing right now, this is all there is. This darkness is all there is. But while they were stuck in this despair, Jesus was behind the scenes emptying the hell that they were living in to bring life and resurrection to every person. To bring life and resurrection to anybody who says, I will be a part of that kingdom. I will proclaim Jesus, my King. So Paul says it this way. In 1 Corinthians, he says, but in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead. He is the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. What Paul is saying in this moment is, oftentimes we think, good job, Jesus, you raised from the dead. Hoorah, yeah. But what we forget is that Jesus' resurrection means all of our resurrections. That in every dark crevice, in every dark space, in every despairful moment, Jesus is fighting for our own resurrection, and he has the power to bring it because he brought his own resurrection, because he is God. And this resurrection that we call upon is not just a future resurrection somewhere out there. It's one that happens here and now. Christ is fighting for your resurrection now. And it happens in 1,000 different ways. There's no formula to it. There's no way that it can be anticipated. And oftentimes it doesn't seem like resurrection. It doesn't look like life. It looks very different than what we may want or what we may hope for. But at the heart of who Christ is, at the heart of his love for us, is his desire to see us restored to life. And so he fights for us, and he will never, ever, ever stop fighting for our resurrection, no matter how dark, no matter how hopeless it may seem, no matter how long, no matter what we've done, no matter where we've been, death and hopelessness never have the final word. Those things are never the new reality. Jesus brings resurrection. So when the women hear the men say of this, they get it, and it clicks. And they understand that Jesus' resurrection not only means that their good friend, the one that they loved, is alive, it also means something for them too. It means that all of those places of darkness and despair are alive also, that they can be redeemed, that they can see life again. And so this joy and this hope wells up within them. And the women get up, no longer in a place of fear, but in a place of joy. And they run and go back to the rest of the disciples and they say, "Oh my gosh, Jesus, he wasn't in the tomb, he was alive, he's resurrected. We all get to be a part of that thing. The kingdom is here." I mean, the disciples, you'd want them to be like, yes, but they aren't. They hear what the women have to say, and I don't know whether it was because sometimes, at least me as a woman, when I get really excited, my voice gets a little squeaky and I talk a little fast. The disciples were like, "We don't know what you're saying. Sounds like nonsense to me." For whatever reason, the disciples were in a place where they were hearing the story. They were hearing the words. They were hearing the facts. They were hearing what happened. But the disciples were like, "That doesn't mean anything for me." Guys, every single one of us has an opportunity today to hear the story and to respond in such a way that says, "Sounds like nonsense to me. That doesn't make sense." Or to respond to it and say, "I want life. I want resurrection." Now, as those disciples went through their days, Jesus met them wherever they were at. Even in that moment, though they were saying, like, "This is nonsense, I don't really understand," Jesus didn't let that go. Jesus fights for our resurrection. And so Jesus continued to show up to these people. He continued to give them glimpses of who he was, that he was indeed back. And so he appears to them like as they're walking along the road. He appears to some of them as they are in a boat and he's along the shore. He appears to some of them while they're locked inside of a room and he just walks on through. Anything to let them know there is life. There is life. There is life. Paul tells us that over 500 people were witness to the fact that Jesus had been resurrected, and not a ghost walking around, but a bodily resurrection, that he was physically alive again, and that this means that there is hope alive for all of us. And so my question for you this morning, do you want resurrection? Maybe the better question is, where do you want resurrection? Because we all have these dead and dark crevices in our life that we kind of have just accepted and tucked away and like, that's fine, and we'll move on. Pretend it's not there. But Jesus has come to bring life and resurrection to all of those dark and dead places. He offers it freely. He says, "Here, this is for you. I've done all the work. I've conquered the grave. I've conquered sin. I've conquered death. This is for you." And we have an opportunity in a moment to remember what Jesus has said, to believe the story, to say yes to resurrection. And so this morning, I want to offer you a moment, whether it's for the very first time. Maybe you have never, ever been in a yes position to accept the resurrection or to believe maybe it could possibly be true. Or maybe this is your 10th or 100th time of saying, yes, bring resurrection again. But whichever it is, I want to offer you a moment this morning to once again hear the story of the resurrection, but not remain unchanged. Instead, this time, allow the story to penetrate you, the truth and the happening of what Jesus did, to change everything for you, to change your understanding of how life works, of how the world works, of how death works, how darkness works, that this is not all there is, but there is a kingdom that Christ is bringing. It started with him, and it's built and continued to build in you. So as the band comes up and we worship together, if you would like to cry out to God and say, yep, I need resurrection. I can even name the area of my life when I need it. I want to invite you to do that. You can do that sitting right there in your seat as they play worship, but we also have some stations around the room that you could do it maybe in a tangible way if you're kind of a tangible person. One way is over at the cross. There's Post-it notes, and you can write out a prayer. You can even write out, I want resurrection, and post it there as you cry out to God. We also have these candles over here that allow you to light a candle. That if you are aware of a dark place in your life or somebody else's life, and you want to say, we need light, we need life, and we need resurrection, and we need hope, that you would be able to light a candle and pray and ask that God would bring that. And there's also communion stations up here. Communion is an opportunity for us to remember the sacrifice that Christ made on the cross, that his body was broken and his blood was poured out for us. And this gives you an opportunity to go to the station, to go to the feet of Christ and say, I need your blood, your body to be in me in order to experience resurrection. And you can cry out for that. However it is, I want to invite you to just cry out to God that he would speak life and truth into those dark places. Would you pray with me? Father God, so often we miss what you did. We take it for granted and we just think that it's this great story. It's really cool for you, but we miss how it changes everything for us. And so, Father, this morning, we want to hold up these dark places, these places where we've just accepted death, whether it's in a relationship, or it's in our bodies, or it's in our spirits. We want to hold up these dead and lifeless places, and we want to say, please, bring life and bring resurrection. Bring your truth. Bring your hope. Father, we want to know you. We want to know the resurrection. We believe in the power. We believe in your Son. So, Father, would you come to the places we've written off? Would you